In the bitter frontier town of Clearwater, Montana Territory, where racial hatred ran deeper than the winter cold, one woman's act of selfless courage would shatter the hearts of 5 brothers who thought they knew the difference between justice and cruelty. What began as punishment for a Native American child became a lesson in humanity that no one who witnessed it would ever forget. When Martha Henderson stepped forward to take 10 lashes meant for a terrified 8-year-old, she had no idea her sacrifice would transform the very souls of the men who ordered that punishment. Sometimes the greatest victories are won not through violence, but through love willing to bear any pain to protect the innocent. This is the incredible true story of how one mother's courage broke through hatred so deep it seemed permanent, proving that compassion can conquer even the hardest hearts when demonstrated through ultimate sacrifice. Ready for a story that will challenge everything you believe about forgiveness? Hit that like button if you believe love conquers hate. Subscribe and ring that notification bell, because tales like this prove that courage takes many forms. Drop a comment about a time when someone's sacrifice changed your heart. I read every single one. The year was 1884, and the town of Clearwater, Montana Territory had grown from a handful of settlers into a community of nearly 400 souls, united by their determination to build civilization in the wilderness and their shared suspicion of the Blackfoot tribes whose ancient hunting grounds surrounded their expanding settlement. Racial tensions simmered beneath the surface of daily life, occasionally erupting into violence that tested everyone's commitment to law and order. The Henderson brothers, James, Robert, William, Thomas, and Samuel, owned the largest ranch in the territory and wielded influence that made their opinions carry weight in community decisions about everything from town planning to law enforcement. Their father's death in a Blackfoot raid 15 years earlier had left them with hatred so deep it poisoned their judgment about anything involving Native Americans, making them advocates for harsh treatment of any tribal members who entered their territory. 8-year-old Running Bear had wandered into Clearwater while following a wounded deer, his hunting practice leading him far from the reservation where his people had been confined by government treaty. His presence in town during market day created immediate tension as merchants and customers noticed the tribal child examining goods with the innocent curiosity of someone who had never seen such abundance of manufactured items. The accusation of theft came when Mrs. Abernathy claimed the boy had taken a piece of penny candy from her store counter, though several witnesses had seen her offer it to him before changing her mind and demanding payment he couldn't provide. The child's inability to speak English made explanation impossible, while his obvious fear of the angry adults surrounding him seemed to confirm their suspicions about his guilt. James Henderson's arrival at the scene escalated the situation from simple misunderstanding to deliberate cruelty, as he saw an opportunity to send a message about what happened to tribal members who entered their territory without permission. His hatred of all Native Americans made him view the child as representative of the people who had killed his father, deserving punishment that would discourage future incursions. "This savage needs to learn respect for civilized law," James declared to the crowd that had gathered around the frightened child. 10 lashes will teach him and his people that stealing from white folks carries consequences they won't forget. We can't let them think our town is a place where they can take whatever they want without facing justice. The other Henderson brothers supported James's decision with enthusiasm born from years of nursing grievances against tribal peoples. Their unified front making opposition seemed futile to townspeople who depended on their economic support and social leadership. Their determination to make an example of Running Bear reflected deep-seated prejudices that had festered since their father's death, making them incapable of seeing the child as anything other than an enemy. Martha Henderson, wife of the eldest brother James, had watched the confrontation develop with growing horror as she recognized the injustice being perpetrated in the name of law and order. Her own experiences raising 3 children had taught her to recognize genuine fear and innocence, making it impossible for her to remain silent while a child faced brutal punishment for a crime that existed only in prejudiced imaginations. The whipping post that stood in the town square had been erected for punishing adult criminals, its height and construction designed for grown men rather than children who could barely reach the restraining rings. The sight of 8-year-old Running Bear being dragged toward this instrument of adult punishment shocked even some supporters of harsh justice, though none found courage to oppose the Henderson brothers' decision. Martha's protest to her husband about the inappropriateness of whipping a child fell on ears deafened by hatred and determination to demonstrate white authority over tribal peoples who had dared enter their territory. James dismissed her concerns as feminine weakness that had no place in decisions about law enforcement and community protection, ordering her to return home while men handled serious matters. The crowd that gathered to witness Running Bear's punishment included families with children who would be forced to watch brutality that would haunt their dreams, while adult spectators struggled with conflicting feelings about justice, mercy, and the price of maintaining social order in territory where survival often depended on projecting strength rather than compassion. Running Bear's terror was visible to everyone present as he was secured to the whipping post, his small body trembling with fear, while tears streamed down his face in anticipation of pain he was too young to understand or deserve. His obvious innocence and vulnerability should have moved adult hearts to mercy, but racial hatred had poisoned too many minds for compassion to prevail over cruelty. The leather whip that would deliver Running Bear's punishment had been designed for adult criminals whose bodies could endure such treatment, making its use on a child's delicate frame potentially fatal as well as unjust. The weapon's weight and construction reflected assumptions about appropriate punishment that had never considered the possibility of its use against someone so young and defenseless. Martha Henderson's final desperate plea to her husband and his brothers to reconsider their decision was met with angry dismissal and threats to have her physically removed from the square if she continued interfering with their administration of justice. Their determination to proceed with the child's punishment revealed hearts so hardened by hatred that family loyalty couldn't soften their resolve to inflict suffering on an innocent victim. Martha Henderson's decision to intervene came in the moment when the whip was raised for the first strike against Running Bear's small body, her maternal instincts overriding every consideration of social propriety and marital obedience, as she stepped forward and declared her intention to take the child's punishment upon herself. Her voice carried across the silent crowd with authority that stopped even her husband's hand. "I will take the 10 lashes meant for this child," Martha announced with dignity that commanded attention despite the shocking nature of her offer. "He is guilty of nothing more than being lost and frightened in a strange place, while I am guilty of allowing my family to participate in cruelty that shames our community and our faith." Although the crowd's stunned silence reflected their inability to process the unprecedented nature of Martha's sacrifice, as no one had ever witnessed a white woman voluntarily accepting punishment meant for a Native American child. Her offer challenged every assumption about racial hierarchy and family loyalty, while demonstrating courage that exceeded anything the Henderson brothers had ever shown in their campaigns against tribal peoples. James Henderson's rage at his wife's public defiance was matched by his confusion about how to respond to her unprecedented challenge to his authority and judgment, as refusing her offer would appear cowardly while accepting it would validate her criticism of his decision. His brothers shared his shock at Martha's boldness while recognizing the impossible position her sacrifice had created for their family's reputation. Martha's calm acceptance of the whip's transfer to her own back was accomplished with grace that contrasted sharply with the brutality that had been prepared for Running Bear. Her willingness to suffer for someone else's child, demonstrating the kind of selfless love that challenged everyone present to examine their own capacity for compassion and sacrifice. The first lash across Martha's back drew gasps from spectators who had expected to witness a child's punishment, but instead found themselves watching a mother voluntarily endure agony to protect someone she had never met. Her suppressed cry of pain revealed the whip's cruel effectiveness, while her determination to continue showed strength that shamed the men who had ordered the original punishment. Running Bear's liberation from the whipping post allowed him to witness Martha's sacrifice on his behalf, his young mind struggling to understand why this white woman would choose to suffer for his protection when her own people had shown him nothing but hostility. Her actions challenged his understanding of racial divisions while demonstrating kindness that transcended cultural boundaries. The second and third lashes opened wounds across Martha's back that stained her dress with blood, the visible evidence of her suffering creating guilt and shame among spectators who had initially supported the child's punishment. Her willingness to endure such pain for a stranger's benefit revealed the hollowness of their claims about Christian charity and civilized behavior. James Henderson's growing horror at watching his wife's pain was complicated by his inability to stop the punishment without admitting error in his original judgment, trapping him in a situation where family loyalty warred with stubborn pride about racial superiority. Each lash that fell across Martha's back struck his conscience with equal force, awakening feelings he had thought permanently buried beneath hatred. The crowd's transformation, from bloodthirsty spectators to horrified witnesses, reflected the power of Martha's sacrifice to reveal the true nature of what they had been prepared to watch. As her voluntary suffering exposed the cruelty they had been willing to inflict on a child, her courage forced them to confront their own capacity for evil disguised as justice. Martha's whispered prayers between lashes demonstrated faith that sustained her through agony, while challenging everyone present to consider what their own beliefs required of them when faced with opportunities to protect the innocent. Her spiritual strength during physical torment revealed character that exceeded anything her husband and his brothers had ever displayed in their positions of community leadership. The fifth lash brought Martha to her knees, but not to surrender, as she continued to endure punishment meant for Running Bear while maintaining dignity that commanded respect from even her harshest critics. Her refusal to abandon her sacrifice, despite overwhelming pain, proved that true courage was measured by willingness to suffer for others rather than ability to inflict suffering on enemies. The remaining lashes fell across Martha's torn flesh with mechanical precision that reflected the whip wielder's growing reluctance to continue punishment that had lost all meaning except as demonstration of one woman's incredible capacity for selfless love. Each strike revealed more clearly the injustice of the original sentence while highlighting the nobility of Martha's voluntary suffering. Martha's completion of the 10 lashes left her collapsed and bleeding but victorious in her mission to spare Running Bear from brutality that would have damaged his body and spirit permanently. Her sacrifice had transformed a moment of cruel injustice into a demonstration of love that challenged everyone present to reconsider their understanding of strength, courage, and moral responsibility. The aftermath of Martha's sacrifice created a silence so profound that even the wind seemed to hold its breath. As spectators struggled to process what they had witnessed, and the Henderson brothers faced the crushing weight of shame that no amount of racial hatred could deflect. Their determination to punish a child had been transformed into a lesson about their own moral failure that cut deeper than any physical wound. James Henderson's first coherent thought after watching his wife collapse was the realization that he had orchestrated the public humiliation and torture of the woman he had sworn to protect and cherish. His leadership in the child's persecution, now revealed as cowardice disguised as strength. The sight of Martha's blood-stained dress and torn flesh made him understand that he had become something monstrous in his pursuit of racial vengeance. Robert Henderson, the second brother, found himself unable to look at Martha's wounds without remembering their mother's teachings about Christian charity and protection of the innocent, lessons he had abandoned in favor of hatred that now seemed petty and evil. His participation in the child's persecution had violated everything their parents had taught them about moral behavior and human decency. William Henderson's realization that they had been prepared to brutalize a child for the crime of being lost and frightened forced him to confront the depth of his own moral corruption, as he understood that their father's death had poisoned their souls beyond anything the Blackfoot raid had done to their bodies. Their hatred had made them worse than the enemies they claimed to oppose. Thomas Henderson watched Martha's labored breathing and understood that her sacrifice had exposed them as the kind of men who would torture children while hiding behind claims of justice and community protection, their behavior revealing character so degraded that a woman had been forced to risk her life to prevent them from committing an unforgivable sin against innocence. Samuel Henderson, the youngest brother, felt his world collapse as he recognized that Martha's courage had accomplished what years of preaching and social pressure had failed to achieve, forcing him to see himself as he truly was, rather than as he pretended to be. Her willingness to suffer for a stranger's child made his own claims about moral superiority seem laughably hollow and self-serving. The crowd's gradual dispersal left the Henderson brothers alone with Martha's unconscious form and Running Bear's wide-eyed witness to their shame, creating a tableau that burned itself into their memories as the moment when their carefully constructed justifications for hatred crumbled beneath the weight of genuine moral courage. Their pretensions about civilization and superiority lay exposed as lies they had told themselves. Dr. Morrison's arrival to treat Martha's wounds provided medical assessment that confirmed the severity of her injuries while highlighting the brothers' responsibility for her condition, his professional disapproval adding to their growing understanding that they had crossed lines that no decent person should ever approach. Their actions had endangered someone they were supposed to protect and cherish above all others. The hours spent waiting for Martha to regain consciousness gave the Henderson brothers time to fully comprehend the magnitude of their moral failure and the price their hatred had extracted from someone innocent of their grievances against tribal peoples. Each brother faced the crushing realization that they had become the kind of men their father would have despised and disowned. Martha's first words upon awakening were questions about Running Bear's welfare rather than complaints about her own pain, her continued concern for the child she had saved demonstrating character that made her brothers-in-law understand how far they had fallen from any claim to moral authority. Her selflessness highlighted their selfishness in ways that made excuses impossible and shame unavoidable. The transformation of the Henderson brothers from community leaders to pariahs began immediately as word of Martha's sacrifice spread throughout Clearwater, creating social isolation that forced them to confront the consequences of actions they had justified through racial hatred and false claims about protecting civilization. Their reputations were destroyed by their own cruelty rather than enemy action. Running Bear's vigil beside Martha's bed provided constant reminder of the innocence they had been prepared to destroy, his presence in their home challenging them to see beyond racial prejudices that had nearly made them child torturers. His obvious gratitude and concern for Martha's recovery forced them to recognize his humanity in ways their hatred had prevented them from acknowledging. The sleepless nights that followed Martha's sacrifice were filled with memories of their parents' teachings about Christian charity and moral behavior, lessons the brothers had abandoned in favor of hatred that had poisoned their souls and nearly cost them everything they should have valued most: Their moral reckoning was as painful as Martha's physical wounds, but far more deserved. The growing certainty that they could never make amends for their actions through normal means led the Henderson brothers toward understanding that only complete humiliation and public acknowledgement of their moral failure could begin to address the magnitude of their sin against innocence and the woman who had saved them from committing an unforgivable crime against a child. The dawn following Martha's sacrifice found the 5 Henderson brothers gathered in their family chapel, each man stripped of the pride and racial hatred that had defined their identities for 15 years, replaced by shame so profound it made breathing difficult and sleep impossible. Their reckoning with moral failure required acknowledgement that could only be expressed through complete humiliation before the woman whose courage had exposed their depravity. James Henderson, as the eldest and leader in the child's persecution, understood that his responsibility was greatest and his fall from grace most complete, making him the first to recognize that only total surrender of pride and public acknowledgement of moral failure could begin to address the magnitude of their sin against innocence and family loyalty. The brothers' decision to publicly beg Martha's forgiveness was reached through individual recognition that their actions had violated everything decent people held sacred, making private apology insufficient for crimes that had been committed before the entire community and against someone who had risked her life to prevent them from torturing a child. Martha's slow recovery from her injuries provided time for the brothers to plan their public penance, while caring for the woman whose sacrifice had saved their souls as much as it had saved Running Bear's body, their nursing duties offering opportunities for service that could never balance the scales, but might demonstrate genuine repentance for their moral failure. The morning chosen for their public confession brought the entire population of Clearwater to the town square, drawn by rumors of the Henderson brothers' planned acknowledgement of error in their treatment of the tribal child and their sister-in-law's heroic intervention to prevent injustice that would have stained the community's honor permanently. James Henderson's approach to Martha's chair was accomplished on his knees, his progress across the dusty square, watched by hundreds of people who had never seen such complete surrender of pride from men who had dominated their community through wealth and social position. His humiliation was voluntary, but no less complete for being chosen rather than imposed. "Martha," James said in a voice that carried across the silent square, "I beg your forgiveness for the cruelty that nearly made me torture a child, and did make me cause your suffering. I am not worthy to call you sister, but I pray that God and you might someday forgive what I can never forgive in myself." Robert Henderson's confession followed his eldest brother's example as he knelt beside James and acknowledged his participation in persecution that had violated every principle of Christian charity and human decency, his tears mixing with dust as he recognized that Martha's sacrifice had prevented them from committing sins that would have damned their souls as well as their reputations. William Henderson's admission of moral failure included acknowledgement that their father would have been ashamed of men who would torture children in the name of justice, his recognition of their betrayal of family values adding personal dishonor to their public disgrace, while highlighting the complete nature of their moral collapse and need for redemption. Thomas Henderson's plea for forgiveness emphasized his understanding that Martha's wounds were testimony to their moral blindness and capacity for evil, her blood having been shed to prevent them from committing crimes that would have made them unworthy of family connection or community membership. His shame was as visible as her scars. Samuel Henderson's confession as the youngest brother included acknowledgement that he had been old enough to know better but had chosen hatred over compassion, making him equally guilty of moral failure that had required a woman's sacrifice to prevent ultimate degradation of their family honor and human decency. Martha's response to her brothers-in-law's public humiliation demonstrated the same grace she had shown during her sacrifice, as she forgave them while acknowledging that their repentance must be proven through changed behavior rather than dramatic gestures. Her mercy was conditional on genuine transformation of hearts that had harbored too much hatred for too long. The community's reaction to the Henderson brothers' public penance was mixed between satisfaction at seeing proud men humbled and recognition that Martha's sacrifice had accomplished what years of preaching had failed to achieve, forcing examination of consciences that had been hardened by racial prejudice and false claims about moral superiority. Running Bear's presence during the confession ceremony provided living testimony to the innocence the brothers had been prepared to destroy, his obvious health and happiness contrasting sharply with the wounds Martha still carried from her sacrifice on his behalf. His forgiveness of his potential tormentors demonstrated wisdom beyond his years and culture beyond their understanding. The establishment of a school for tribal children on Henderson land represented the brothers' commitment to practical repentance through service to the people they had wronged. Their resources now dedicated to education and understanding, rather than persecution and hatred. Their transformation from enemies to allies required years of consistent action to prove genuine change of heart. Martha's full recovery took months, but was accomplished with the loving care of 5 men who had learned that true strength came through service rather than domination. Their attention to her needs demonstrating the change in character that her sacrifice had made possible. Her courage had not only saved a child, but had saved 5 souls from damnation through their own cruelty. The legacy of Martha Henderson's sacrifice became a story told throughout Montana Territory as an example of how love could triumph over hatred when demonstrated through willingness to suffer for others, her 10 lashes having accomplished more for racial understanding than years of legislation or military intervention. Her courage had transformed enemies into family and hatred into hope for better understanding between peoples.